guys very much for coming. I really appreciate it. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about various forms of companion animal legislation that you may want to get passed either in your community or in your state. So we're going to talk about a list. The topics that I'm going to cover are puppy mill legislation, gas chambers legislation, rescue access rights, talk briefly about the Austin no-kill implementation plan, and breed discrimination. Obviously, there are a lot of things, there's innumerable things that we could talk about, so I won't be able to talk about any more topics than that, even though there are a lot. And within these topics, we're going to talk about the background and the need for legislation in this arena, issues that you need to consider when you're crafting legislation, including recommended items to include, things you need to worry about, consider, and some sample language in a couple of examples. Puppy mills. So a lot of people talk about puppy mills, and it's very much a hot topic. So I figured it would be worthwhile kind of walking through what the basics of puppy mill legislation, the different types of puppy mill legislation, and then I'll also talk about what Texas has, to the extent you're in Texas, and then some, in addition to what Texas has, some model language that you could use if you're in another state. This, by the way, is an Amish puppy mill. Well, what I found amazing about this photo is, and this was the website it was on, Citizens Against Puppy Mills. What I found amazing about this photo is that the puppy mill owner didn't find it odd that somebody wanted to take a picture. Like, they weren't embarrassed by it at all. He was like, oh yeah, come on, take a picture of the dogs. You'll often see dogs in puppy mills stacked on top of each other. And sometimes, as you can see, this is just mesh or fencing beneath them. So if they're stacked on top of each other, obviously, they go to the bathroom on the ones below them. I mean, really, really wretched circumstances. This was a Missouri puppy mill. So what are they? There's not a real clear answer to what a puppy mill is. A lot of people talk about, oh, we got to close puppy mills, but they don't necessarily have a definition of it. It's something we hate in theory, but then when we think about it, and it becomes a little harder. So this is what I've tried to put together as kind of what we're talking about here. They tend to be large-scale commercial breeders of dogs and cats. These are not your person who wants to breed their dog once. What we're talking about is somebody who's doing this for sale as an industry on a large scale. They often have abusive and neglectful conditions of the animals at the puppy mills. Often you'll see those stacked cages like I showed you the picture of. Dogs often get little or no exercise or even time outside their cages. Some animals will spend their entire lifetime inside one cage like that. Females are often overbred, and then when they're done, tossed away or killed. There are a lot of sick or injured animals that get stuck in the cages, animals that get very, very ill, and they tend to be not given adequate veterinary care. Currently, there's no solidarity in the law. It's very much a patchwork of federal, sometimes state laws, sometimes local laws. So it's not something clear and clean across communities. It's very much a patchwork. There is a federal law that the federal government does kind of consider apply to puppy mills, and that's the Federal Animal Welfare Act of 1966. What it was really meant for was breeders that provide animals to labs and things like that, but the enforcement has been extended to any commercial breeder, or almost any. Until recently, it was wholesale only, meaning that the federal government considered it applying only to wholesale sellers, meaning they sold it to other companies. They'll sell hundreds or thousands to another company, but that it didn't apply to someone selling directly to the public. But recently, the federal government changed its mind on that and is trying to now regulate direct sales to the public as well. The Federal Animal Welfare Act is a licensing and inspection process, but not a whole lot more. It does not preempt local and state regulation, which is really, really important. For those of you not familiar, there's a doctrine of law called preemption. And what it means is that if a superior level of government regulates something, then an inferior level of government can't. So if the federal government decides that it's going to regulate arena and it doesn't have a clause that says that it doesn't preempt, it could be argued that a state government has no ability to regulate that arena. And if a state government regulates a specific arena, and again doesn't have this anti-preemption language in it, it can be argued that a local government can't regulate in that arena. They're preempted from doing so. Fortunately, the Animal Welfare Act, the Federal Animal Welfare Act, specifically says that it does not preempt local or state regulation, meaning that we can add layers of regulation on top of what the federal government laws are. State and local laws vary, with many states having no regulation at all with respect to puppy mills. So there are 4 types as far as I could tell. I basically tried to research everything I could with respect to how puppy mills are regulated, and they're regulated in 4 different ways. One is direct on-site regulations. We're talking about very specific things like you could limit a cage sizes, or require a minimum cage size, require veterinary care. Those are direct on-site regulation, but that's not the only way to affect puppy mills. 2 would be retail and pet store regulations, meaning when they get them to a pet store or when they try to sell them, regulate that process. For example, we've done so in Austin. 3, consumer remedies. And this would be a tort law remedy. So to the extent that someone sold an animal, a puppy mill sold an animal to a person and that animal was too sick or injured, theoretically there could be laws that allow that person to sue the puppy mill and get something for that damage. And 4th, general anti-cruelty laws should always apply in the puppy mill context. So even if, like, let's say you found a puppy mill in your community and your community was one that didn't have any puppy mill regulations, that does not mean that the police have to throw up their hands and say there's nothing we can do, because there are going to be anti-cruelty laws in your community and in your state, and those would apply equally in the puppy mill context. Just because someone is doing something commercially doesn't mean that the remainder of the laws don't apply to them. On-site regulation. So here's some examples. You can limit the number of animals, period. You can say, you could have no more than 50 animals at a puppy mill. Or you could have certain limit on the number of breeding animals. You could require licensing and or fees. I actually think that licensing is a little bit dangerous because it has the risk of showing the public that their conduct has been approved by the state or federal government. And you will see puppy mills show their licenses, their federal government licenses, but they're still treating the animals terribly. But on their website, it'll say, they'll have their license, and it'll look like and present to the public as if that means that they have been essentially approved by the federal government. And I think that is a risk to having a licensing type system. Also, you can implement mandatory unannounced inspection process. That's what I would recommend, so that they don't know when you're coming, but the regulators have to be there X amount of times per year, maybe 2 times, maybe 5 times, whatever it is. In a big state, it would be difficult to do it 5 times, but maybe once a year, unannounced. And you can regulate the conditions. We're talking about food, access to water, ability to exercise and play outside of the cages, adequate sanitation and ventilation, getting rid of stacking, barring stacking, requiring veterinary care. These are all the little things that you can do to hopefully both increase the quality of life for animals in these facilities and, with even more hope, get rid of them, right? Because maybe the regulatory requirements become so burdensome that they decide they don't want to do it. Here's the Texas's puppy mill law. How many people are from Texas here? Okay, so a good number. So you probably, maybe some of you know this, but our law is incredibly weak. It was touted as this gigantic, amazing thing that we did, but it's really, really weak. It applies only to facilities with 11 or more breeding females, only to facilities with 20 or more sales a year. Fortunately, it does not preempt local ordinances, which means that your local government can impose greater regulations. It authorizes a licensing process, like I discussed. It mandates inspections once every 18 months or upon a complaint. Of course, most people close their doors and don't allow the public there, so who would be there to complain? It authorizes a commission to adopt minimum humane standards of care, including exercise, very minimal enclosure standards, and I think it was they have to be able to turn around in the crate. And 1 veterinary visit per year for each breeding animal. So very, very, very minimal. I mean, I guess you could call it a success, but my concern with a law that is as weak as this is somebody can then say, hey, we're approved. We're state of Texas approved. Look at our seal from the state of Texas on our website, and when all they have to do is have a cage that's big enough for the animal to turn around. Any questions about the on-site puppy mill legislation, regulation? No? Okay. So the next one would be retail ordinances. And these are really popular across the country now. A lot of municipalities are passing these. And I think they're passing because nobody's against them for the most part. I mean, there might be some pet stores that are going to be against them. But for the most part, all the animal welfare groups who are usually fighting each other all agree that we should pass pet sales ordinances. So generally they're local in nature, so it's going to be your municipality or your county. And their ordinance is to regulate, limit, or ban the sale or purchase of puppy mill animals within municipalities. You can have an all-out ban, which would say, under X circumstances, you cannot sell the animals. Or you can have restrictions and regulations, which is what we passed in Austin, which require a veterinary certificate of health. So each animal has to be seen by a veterinarian who basically signs on the health of the animal, signs off on the health of the animal. We require that animal be spayed, neutered, or vaccinated to be sold at a pet store, and vaccinated, I should say. And there's, I think, a $100 fee per animal or something like that. And what that did essentially is it made the market not one that pet stores wanted to come into and sell puppy mill dogs. We didn't have one anyway. There was one pet store, I think, that was selling dogs and cats, and it had exited the market already when we passed this. But I like that we passed it anyway because it basically tells pet stores, this is not your market. There's no reason to come in here. It's going to be incredibly burdensome. To do that, you should just adopt out shelter or rescue animals instead. Make sure, obviously, if you do pass a pet store ordinance or a retail ordinance that you exempt animal shelters or rescue groups from the ban because you don't want to be banned from doing what we do. You don't want to have nonprofits be banned. But there's also a big issue, which is internet sales. And I think that's a big issue going forward. I think it's going to be difficult to regulate internet sales. And I think that's going to continue to be something that we're going to need to develop strategies for. Any questions about the retail ban or ordinances? Yeah?
Was it Petland that you guys escorted out of town?
Yeah. Yeah, they left the market before we even did this. They claimed that they were leaving the market because of this, but I mean, they just didn't have any political clout. Okay, so next is consumer protection laws, and this would be essentially like a lemon law for animals. And I've read people talk about these things, but I actually don't know of an example of one, but I'm assuming they're out there. What this would do is provide a consumer remedy for someone who's purchased a sick or ill animal from a breeder or retail outlet so that you could go back and essentially sue for more than the price of the animal. Because if it's just the price of the animal, they're probably not going to care. Usually in the samples that I've seen, again, I don't know one enacted, but in the samples I've seen, they've limited it to either requiring them to replace the animal, which, as you probably know, most people who get an ill animal don't simply want a replacement from the store. A refund, which also people don't seem to want, or the cost of veterinary care, which I think could be considerable if you got a sick or ill animal. Now, what I think we should do for these laws is make it so that there's some kind of penalty on top of just simply the replacement cost of the animal, so that you could either recover emotional distress or all veterinary costs without limitation, not simply up to the cost of the animal. So it basically imposes an incentive, I think, a greater incentive on those who are breeding animals to provide better care of the animals that they provide. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if any of you have done it, but if you really want to ruin your day, watch one of the videos of the puppy mill breeders, it's really astonishing how bad the conditions are. So I think that we should be using every tool that we have to make it more difficult for them to earn a livelihood doing what they're doing to animals. And again, though, you of course want to exempt shelter animals because, as we know, in the sheltering industry, we cannot guarantee the health of every animal. And you don't want a rescue group or a shelter having some $10 or $15 or $20,000 vet bill because of an animal that was adopted out. So you'd want to exclude any of them from that kind of law. Any more questions about puppy mills? All right, let's go to gas chambers. This might ruin your day too, I'm sorry, but I think it's incredibly important, especially for those that are in another state. Texas has passed one. These seem to be gaining steam, gaining momentum across the country. Just a few years ago, I think there were only 18 or 20 states that had outlawed gas chambers. Now I think it's considerably more. And there are some states that haven't outlawed them but don't have any. So that's good too. The momentum does seem to be in our favor in closing gas chambers. But I told you I'd talk about why they're bad, so I'm going to. What a gas chamber does, just in case you don't know, is it kills animals by a carbon monoxide inhalation. Animals are placed in a metal box, usually fully conscious. Sometimes multiple animals, sometimes there have been cases of multiple species. Sometimes live animals are piled on top of the dead bodies from the prior kills. And I talked about ruining your day. I actually did watch a video of a gas chamber, and I was an absolute mess. I was an absolute total mess. I couldn't believe that human beings were doing this. It just is so, so devastating. There's a high-pitched sound from the chamber when the chamber gets filled with carbon monoxide. Sometimes it can take as long as 30 minutes to work. Animals, if multiple animals are put into the chambers together, they often panic or fight. Like I said, they're banned or partially banned in roughly 20 states. I think it might be up to 25 or so now. This is what someone wrote who watched animals in a gas chamber. She wrote, "Animals gasp for breath, their insides burning. They claw at the floor and throw themselves against the walls of the chamber in an attempt to get out. Sometimes it takes the dog or cat as long as 30 minutes to die. It's terrifying and excruciating." And the reason one of the important reasons that I bring this up and I talk about this is because we have to be real about what we in the animal welfare community are doing to animals. This is the sheltering industry. These are the people who are supposed to care more than anybody else for animals. And in North Carolina especially, there are a bunch of them that are doing this to the animals that they're supposed to care about. This was a picture I took from that video. In Davidson, North Carolina, this was an article in the newspaper that a man went to the animal shelter and saw employees laugh as they put a mother cat, her kitten, and a raccoon into the same compartment at the same time and let them fight before they turned on the gas. The shelter has also used gas chambers to euthanize kittens, puppies, and sick animals, which is usually against the law, even in states that allow gas chambers, because the gas doesn't work on sick, old, or young animals because their lungs aren't developed enough. It is among the cruelest ways to legally kill an animal, if not the cruelest way to legally kill an animal. But it's not just bad for animals, it's bad for people too. So when you're talking about this to a state legislator, for example, you should talk about the fact that it not only impacts animals, but it impacts people. They are in fact dangerous for shelter staff. Gas chambers have in fact exploded and hurt people. Terrified animals, when they're placed into the chamber, can sometimes hurt, bite, scratch staff. And the American Humane Association ran a cost-benefit analysis comparing gas chambers to lethal injection, and what they found that it is actually more costly to run a gas chambers than to implement a lethal injection system. Now, they will fight you over that because it turns out that you have to have more staff, because a lot of little rural shelters that are doing a gas chamber, they have one animal control officer, and so that's the way they say, well, I'd have to hire somebody. But at least according to the American Humane Association, it's actually revenue positive in the long run to use lethal injection over gas chambers, because gas chambers are actually pretty expensive to operate. And they have to be replaced and they have to be repaired. And they're dangerous on top of that. So here's the Texas language that was just passed last session, which was 2 years ago in Texas. Just so you know, we only have the legislative session once every other year because we believe in small government. A person may euthanize a dog or cat in the custody of an animal shelter only by administering sodium pentobarbital. So if you are reading between the lines, that means they can still use gas chambers for any other type of animal. Bunnies, squirrels, rabbits, ferrets, snakes, anything. So I'm not a big fan of that language, but that's the language that passed. Here is what the No-Kill Advocacy Center's model language is, which I think is obviously a lot more detailed, and I think it's better. All animals impounded by a public or private sheltering agency or rescue group shall be killed only when necessary and consistent with the requirements of this act. There are some other requirements in the Companion Animal Protection Act. By lethal intravenous injection of sodium pentobarbital, except as follows. 1, enteroperitoneal injections may be used only under the direction of a licensed veterinarian and only when intravenous injection is not possible. That is the stomach cavity. Or intracardiac injections may be used only when intravenous injection is not possible for animals who are completely unconscious or comatose, and then only under the direction of a veterinarian. So basically makes it very difficult. You can't use the gas chambers, and you can use these other, and it limits the ability to use what can be more painful ways of killing an animal. So, you know, a lot of people will talk about heart sticking or whatever. There can be times where that's appropriate, but it's only appropriate when the animal is comatose and completely unconscious. So the reason that there's two additional pieces to the legislation is because it also intends to limit the ability to use lethal injection in a painful manner, essentially, because they can be painful for the other two. All right, rescue access. How many people are familiar with rescue access legislation? Anybody? I know you guys are. So the concept of rescue access legislation is to essentially give rescue groups a legal right to go pull animals that the shelter plans to kill. And, you know, a lot of people would think, well, why on earth would we need to do that? And there are actually real reasons we do. By the way, I took this picture when Austin Pets Alive was saving the dogs that were at risk from the Bastrop fire. I don't know if anybody heard about that, but several years ago when Bastrop was essentially on fire, really, really horrible fires, Austin Pets Alive drove vans into the city and basically rescued every single dog that had been left behind, which was amazing. And we did this in the middle of the night. It was like, 11 o'clock. They sent out an email saying, we need people to come and foster every single animal that's in our facility so that we can put in the facility every single animal that we're getting from Bastrop. And by the time I got there, 45 minutes later, there were huge lines out the door for people that were willing to foster. And I think we adopted out most of the animals within the weekend. It was really amazing. It's wonderful work. So what is a rescue access law? It's like I just said, it's a law that guarantees qualified rescue groups a right to rescue animals that animal shelters plan to kill. This is the law in Delaware and in California. Those are the two states that already have some kind of rescue access law. And it's been proposed in probably another dozen states, including Texas. 2 years ago, we had a rescue access bill that got out of committee, but didn't get past committee. Why are they needed? Well, despite the fact that all the good work that we've all done, there are still 6 to 8 million animals entering shelters, half of whom are dying. And there are some shelters that refuse to work with rescue groups willing to save the animals and kill them, even if there's a rescue group sitting there waiting and ready, able, and willing to take the animal. And so this legislation is designed to make it impossible for shelters to do so. But why else does it matter? According to a New York survey of rescue groups, 71% of them had a shelter refuse to transfer an animal to them. Then the shelter turned around and killed the same animal that the shelter refused to allow the rescue group to save. 43% of rescue groups had been retaliated against for speaking out against inhumane conditions at a shelter, meaning the rescue groups were told, you're not allowed to save anymore because you said something about the conditions of our shelter. And this is what I find just incredibly depressing. 52% of rescue groups reported witnessing inhumane conditions and not saying anything out of fear of having their rescue abilities taken away. So if those of us who are dedicated to saving animals and dedicated to animal welfare, half of us are unwilling to say anything about conditions at animal shelters because we're afraid of what will happen to our group if we do. And I get emails like this pretty frequently. I got one a couple weeks ago about somebody who witnessed something horrible at an animal shelter, but she doesn't want to rock the boat because she doesn't want them to not let her pull anymore. And what should she do? I don't have an answer for that. Because if you do say something, you very well could be risking your abilities. Now, you could sue under Section 1983, which is, a topic for another day, but that doesn't mean that animals wouldn't die because they wouldn't cut you off for at least a while. So, arguments in favor of rescue access. Rescue access laws are revenue positive. Absolutely. They will save the government's money. So this is one of the best things and the best talking points you can say, especially if you have a Republican-leaning legislature. This will save the government money because instead of killing the animals, they will be taken out of your system, and the rescue group will be in charge of it. The No-Kill Advocacy Center estimates that passing the California law saves about $1.8 million a year to the state of California taxpayers. The city of San Francisco concluded it alone saved about $500,000 annually because of the rescue agreement that it has with San Francisco SPCA. Best Friends Animal Society also did analysis in Texas on our proposed legislation, and they concluded the same thing, that rescue access laws actually save government money and save taxpayers money. Of course, they also save lives. Passage of the law in California increased the number of animals transferred by 370%. 12,000 in 1997, almost 59,000 in 2010. So they dramatically increase life saving. The other thing they do is they tend to make rescue groups better, because a lot of them are 501c3s with some requirements, and so some rescue groups end up getting their act together a little bit more and abiding by more laws and getting more protections and getting a good board of directors, which I think is really important for any rescue group, so that you have somebody kind of looking at what you're doing all the time and not necessarily agreeing with everything. I actually believe dissent is really important. If everybody on your board agrees, you're probably not doing the right thing. Get somebody on your board who's going to push you and disagree with you and try to make you better. So what do these provisions look like? Well, first, of course, there has to be a rescue access right in the bill. So you want something that guarantees a right to rescue animals that are scheduled to be killed. You're going to have some kind of notice requirement so that the rescue groups know that which animals are going to die or that they need to go pick up the animals. In the legislation that we proposed in Texas 2 years ago, what we ended up with, it wasn't our first draft, but our third or fourth or fifth draft ended up with basically putting essentially no duty on the shelters. All they had to do was give us the list of animals who came in that day, when their hold period, will let us know when their hold period was going to be up. And then we knew on that day we could pick them up. So it was nothing that they shouldn't have been tracking already. Because the rest of the shelters really started complaining and saying, well, we don't want to have to track, who's called about what animal and all that kind of stuff. That's going to cause us all too much hassle. We're too busy. So we said, all right, just tell us what you already know, what you already have to track, which is when the animals are taken off the stray hold if they're not redeemed by their owner. And in that sense, they gave the rescue groups knowledge of this is the time that you can come get them. Some, like the Delaware law, has it so they actually have to send out an email to every rescue group that has asked for the email that says, here are the animals that are going to die and here are the dates they're going to die on. And then the rescue groups can pick and choose among those animals. You also want to have some exclusions so that certain types of animals probably won't be protected, and that would be essentially dangerous dogs and truly irredeemably suffering and sick animals. Because you don't necessarily want rescue groups, you don't want them coming to get truly dangerous dogs. You don't necessarily want them coming to get truly suffering animals. You want some safeguards to protect you from certain types of rescue groups, because again, that's the warning that the shelters said, oh, well, these rescue groups are hoarders. That's the first thing out of their mouths when we talk to the shelters. Well, the rescue groups are hoarders, we can't be trusted, the animals need to be protected by us killing them. They don't use the word killing, but you know what I mean. That's what they said. We need to protect the animals from the rescue groups, so we can't allow them to take them out. So we said, fine, let's craft some rules around which rescue groups qualify for it. And you also want to have a liability waiver, which I wrote into the Texas bill, because you don't want the shelters to have any reason to object, right? And one of the things they said was, well, that's going to have liability. What if one of our animals that we transfer to you bites somebody? And I said, fine, we'll write a liability into the law that says if an animal shelter transfers a dog or cat under this act, it cannot be held liable. Boom, done. You know, you have to fix all of their complaints, because a lot of their complaints are not real. But if you fix them, they have fewer objections. And here's the rescue right from the no-kill advocacy model language, which says that no animal in the care or custody of a shelter shall be destroyed if, prior to the killing of that animal, a nonprofit animal rescue group requests possession of the animal. So, pretty simple. The safeguards, remember I talked about you want to exclude you want to deal with some of the objections. And one of the ways you do that is to exclude rescue groups who you wouldn't want to be taking animals out. So I say, fine, exclude organizations with an officer or board member that's been convicted of an animal-related crime or has charges pending for an animal, or an even investigation pending for an animal-related crime. Fine, exclude all of them. Require proof of a veterinary provider. Make sure that they have a current veterinarian that they use to take care of the animals. In California, and I have no objection to it, require a 501c3. I know there are rescue groups that are going to say, well, I'm not a 501c3, we can't afford that. And I said, fine, then you don't get the benefit of the law. You can still pull animals, you just don't have a rescue right. And if you want a rescue right, then become a corporation and get the 501c3. It's not that hard, and if you're that serious about saving enough lives, then you'll go get the 501c3. And allow, this was the big fight. This was the huge fight, is that the shelters wanted the ability to go inspect people's homes before they even got approved. And that was when I was like, hey, this is still Texas. You don't get to going in, sneak around in people's houses just to qualify them for something that you qualify adopters for every day without going to see their houses. And believe it or not, we worked with HSUS on this, but this was a real stickler for them too. They really, really wanted shelters to have the right to go in and inspect people's houses. I think what we ended up almost compromising on is they said, fine, if the rescue group has a shelter, we have a right to go inspect the shelter. All right, fine. You can go look at the shelter. But we were going to have very specific things about what they could deny an application for, and they would have to give you the ability to fix it if it was, on a list of specific things that they could deny you for. And they may choose to do inspections. If you wanted to put inspection, I say you have to have cause to do an inspection. Just make it like any other criminal law, any other law in America, which is that you can't just start tracking somebody. The police cannot demand to come into your house. They have to have probable cause to do so. So fine, if you actually have a real reason that you're worried about a rescue group harming animals, if you actually have, objective evidence that you're concerned about, fine, at least that. But don't do it on a hunch. Don't do it because you don't. What we have to eliminate is them making up a reason to go inspect somebody and to go raid somebody. Which is, by the way, what happened in Austin many years ago. When someone went and spoke at city council, all of a sudden their rescue got raided the next day. Also some animals would be excluded. For example, an animal suspected of carrying rabies, dogs determined to be dangerous by the court of competent jurisdiction, a dog with a documented history of unprovoked biting that caused a severe injury, an animal experiencing irremediable physical suffering with a poor diagnosis of recovery as certified by a veterinarian. All of these things were things we added in to try to resolve some of the objections that shelters had. There was what about dangerous dogs? Okay, fine, we'll exclude them. Well, what about this? What about that? Fine, we'll exclude them. We still didn't get it passed, but we, tried to deal with every objection that they had. All right, next topic, 10 minutes, got it. City council mandates. So some of you may have heard me talk about this earlier. But this is what I recommend if you're trying to get a city council to mandate no-kill in your community. First, compare your community's programs to the no-kill equation. I've talked about that in all of my sessions. So go back to those 11 programs and policies and see what your community has and see what's in the recommended list of programs and policies. Identify the gaps, pretty easy, simple enough, right? And then lobby your butt off to try to get the city council to mandate that the shelter management implement the programs that they don't have. So the no-kill equation again: feral cat trap, neuter, and release program, high volume, low-cost spay-neuter, rescue groups, foster care, comprehensive adoption programs, including off-site adoptions, pet retention, medical and behavioral rehabilitation, public relations, community involvement, volunteers, proactive redemptions, and a compassionate director. So these are the things you want to make sure someone is doing in your community. It doesn't necessarily have to be the shelter, but if you want to try to get the shelter to do it and pass a no-kill resolution at your shelter, this is what you want to ask the city council to pass, to make sure that each of these things is accounted for in your resolution. So here's the City of Austin's no-kill plan. We wanted to change the mission of animal services to 90%. It was 50%. They changed it to 90%. Off-site adoptions, large-scale foster program. Again, you see these are being repeated, right? They look just like the no-kill equation. Intake counseling, community cat spay, neuter, and release, low-cost and free spay, neuter, advanced youth list to rescue partners, public awareness, new website, increased return to owner, moratorium on empty cage killing. And that was because we found out that they were killing despite having 100 to 150 empty cages every single day. Fascinatingly, I got a phone call from a Texas state senator last night, and he said, I heard about this bill in Florida where they banned empty cage killing. I want to propose that. And I'm like, I like you. That's great. I will get you that. Because myself and a couple of others here are the ones who kind of came up with that idea and got Austin to pass it, and now it's in some of the model legislation nationally. So again, I showed you guys this morning, but there's the difference that in live outcomes over time that we had in Austin because of after the no-kill implementation plan. So if anybody missed it, if you weren't there this morning, in June of 2008 was when Austin Pets Alive started. Here, I go backwards just in case. This was our first dip. So we went up to 80% pretty quickly. Then we had our first dip due to kitten season. Then we went up again, all past 80% in 2010. This is when our city council mandated the implementation of no-kill to be implemented by a shelter director who did not agree with it and very much fought it. And at that moment, the shelter decided to see what would happen if they stopped doing intake vaccines. And that is your next dip, because shelter stopped pulling because all the animals were sick, and also kitten season. But this, in March of 2010, was when the city council mandated no-kill, and you can see the numbers go up very, very, very quickly. Into December of 2010, which was just the end of that year that they mandated it, it was an 88% save rate. By February of 2011, it was over 90%, and it's been over 90% every single month since February of 2011. Last one, breed discrimination. 5 minutes, perfect. Breed discrimination. So this is a personal issue for me, and it comes up a lot. And again, this is yet another thing that's really exciting because we're seeing it being taken down in city and town after town, city after city, and state after state, and it's really, really exciting to see. But what is breed discrimination? So breed discriminatory laws, and by the way, I almost always try to use the word breed discrimination instead of what a lot of people use they call it breed-specific laws. I do that for a reason. If you're talking to an average stranger on the street and you use the words breed-specific laws or BSL, they have no idea what you're talking about. If you use the words breed discrimination or breed discriminatory laws, that makes sense, right? It means that we're discriminating based on a breed. And with everything in animal welfare, if you've heard me in other presentations too, our goal is to reach beyond those who already know what our issues are. It's not just to convince everybody who we're already fighting with or agreeing with on a daily basis. It's constantly to reach beyond our audience, to reach a broader audience. And so I try to use language that is very clear. Maybe that's the lawyer in me, but I always try to use language that people will understand. I never use acronyms like BSL. People don't know what that means. It doesn't help communicate. So I try to use words that people understand. But anyway, there are certain communities that ban breeds. There are certain communities that require breed-specific or breed-discriminatory mandatory spay-neuter. So it would say, we have a mandatory spay-neuter for pit bulls, for example. And some communities have breed-discriminatory adoption or rescue policies. I just got an email this week from somebody in another community in Texas that they don't allow people to adopt pit bulls, and I think that's illegal. Breed discrimination does not make communities safer. There are all kinds of studies on this. It does not make any community safer to ban any specific breed of dog. What it does do is it kills a lot of dogs and it breaks up families. It's costly, it's completely ineffective. There is no evidence that these laws work in any way, shape, or form. And I believe that breed discrimination is founded in classism and in racism. I believe that these laws were probably originally passed to keep, quote unquote, those people out of our communities and those people out of our neighborhoods. There's actually a neighborhood in Austin that the city helped found that has a pit bull ban in it. It upsets me to no end. And I think if you really think about where that came from, it's probably we need to keep those people out of our neighborhood. Here's the Texas's law on breed discrimination. This is in the Health and Safety Code. And this is what I would tell anybody that has such a law in their Texas community or policies to point their city council persons to this. A county or municipality may place additional requirements or restrictions on dangerous dogs if the requirements or restrictions, one, are not specific to one breed or several breeds of dogs, and two, are more stringent than restrictions provided by this subchapter. I won't get into the legalese of whether or not this would cover which situations, but I think if you have a shelter in Texas that is refusing to adopt out or allow the rescue of pit bulls, that you should point them to this and you should tell them they're breaking Texas law. And here's the proposed language that we put in that rescue access law 2 years ago that did not pass, but I think it's good language, which just says an animal shelter may not refuse to adopt or transfer a dog or cat based on the animal's age, breed, type, mix, appearance, or size. Basically, you just can't use the animal as an excuse. If you've got a real reason not to adopt it out, that's fine, but you can't use the animal. What are effective things to do the things that people think breed bans do? Leash containment laws, but obviously for dogs only. I mean, I've always said, there's very little danger of a dog attacking somebody if it's on the end of a leash. It's not going to go do huge damage if you're making sure that people are holding it. Dangerous dog legislation that focuses on the behavior and the specific conduct of the individual dog and doesn't try to treat it as a larger group. Just focus on the individual. And this is my views on basically everything with respect to animal welfare. Focus on the individual. Figure out a way for that individual to be saved. Figure out a way to deal with that one individual dog, not a breed. Because breed doesn't really tell you anything about the animal. It just tells you what it looks like. It doesn't tell you what it is. And then, of course, anti-chaining laws, because there is evidence that animals that are held on chains in their backyards are more likely to bite. So get rid of the things that these laws are attempting to prevent, which is the breed discrimination, and then focus on things that actually work to do those things. And it really is exciting because across the country, Best Friends, I think, is doing a really good job of lobbying for this. Across the country, we're starting to see these turn upside down over and over again. So that's all I have for you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.